Welcome to a special edition of City Life. I'm Beverly Thompson. Last November, an incident occurred that would shake Durham. A young man died from what was determined to be a self-inflicted gunshot wound while in the back of a police car. Whether you had an opinion about the incident or not, you probably watched and read about the follow-up protests pretty closely. Joining me to talk about what's happened during these protests and why the Durham Police Department responded in the manner that they did is Mayor Bill Bell and Deputy Chief Larry Smith. Thank you both so much for joining me.
Good to be here.
Mayor, let's start with you. In November, 17-year-old Jesus Huerta died of a self-inflicted gunshot wound in the back of a police car at police headquarters. Since then, our community has endured 3 protests that have not ended well and really have taken an emotional toll on the community. What would you say to residents, as well as the family of young Huerta, about what's happened so far?
Well, Bill, first of all and foremost, we certainly have sent our condolences to the family. I mean, anytime there's a loss of life, there's first concern of the victim and then the families. In terms of the protests that have taken place, I would say that Durham, as you probably know, is a city that's very much open. We pretty much have an activist community. We have opportunities for people to express their opinions, but there's a manner in which they do it. And unfortunately, not sure what the protest was about based on all the violence that came out of that. So I would say to the persons who were involved, we certainly would not expect that again. And I would say to the residents of the city of Durham, you can be rest assured that the City Council is going to be watching very closely to make sure it doesn't happen again. Okay, all right. Deputy Chief Smith, the first protest occurred back in November, and it did result in some property damage. Tell our viewers about what transpired and how the officers responded to it.
Sure. First, I'd like to echo what the mayor said and send our condolences to the Huerta family. And as the mayor said, we're used to dealing with Durham is known for a city of being able to air their grievances and the things that they're not happy with, and we're used to that. And so this one, the first one, like the past one, started at CCB Plaza with a march to headquarters, and we had some officers present, but because we were used to dealing with that and we didn't anticipate any violence or any property damage. But as the march got to headquarters, what happened was several individuals masked up come out of the crowd and began to vandalize a police car and police headquarters and assault a few officers, and it happened very quickly, and we weren't prepared for that, and it ended up costing us, the city, between $8,000 and $10,000 in property damage.
Mayor Bell, as an elected official, what was your impression of the behavior of the protesters and the actions of the police in response? Well,
that's a good question. In my opinion, I think the opinion of most residents of Durham, it was unacceptable. As the chief has indicated, Durham is pretty much of an activist community, so we're used to protesting, civil rights protests, all the things that have happened, but all and most of them have been peaceful. And in terms of, I guess, the reaction that I had, it hasn't changed. I think that if people want to follow the guidelines that we've set down, they're free to do that. If they're not willing to follow those guidelines, then they're going to accept the results of that.
Okay. Well, and then there was a follow-up protest in December, and the outcome of that one was a bit different. However, the police department received a lot of criticism for your show of force. Tell our viewers why the department decided to respond in the way it did, and what actions by the protesters caused your response.
Okay, well, what happened, we had a second one, and we found out that the organizer of the second one and the participants of the second one were posting on social media. So we knew we had the same organizer. And what we tried to do was reach out to the organizer, Chief tried to reach out to the family, because we wanted to ensure a peaceful protest. And we got stonewalled at every turn. Nobody would talk with us, and based on some of the information we were receiving, and quite frankly, some people were communicating with us directly, telling us that we could expect worse this time. And so based on that, we had a heavier police presence initially. It was just uniformed officers down where it started. We had our mobile field force staged. They were not visible during the onset of it. But however, the trigger for that was we would not allow our officers or anyone, including our officers, to be assaulted, and we would not allow property to be damaged again. And so later into the march, as they marched back to the plaza, several of our officers began to be assaulted with bottles and some sticks, and then once at the plaza, they began to deface the city property. And at that point, we made a decision to disperse the crowd, and most people did disperse, but we did have some that stayed were more resistant to include then throwing rocks, and that's when smoke and tear gas was deployed.
Okay.
But in that particular one, there wasn't anyone injured and there was no property damage.
So, Mayor Bell, there were some complaints, as you know, following that incident, that the police responded too harshly, and claims that the protesters weren't even engaging in violence, especially toward the police. How would you respond to that allegation?
Well, first of all, I think it's important to know that I was not there, and the vast majority of Durham residents were not involved. A lot of what we got was a result of media reporting, and you know, we can sit back and Monday morning quarterback about what should have happened. But the fact of the matter is that the people were not conducting themselves in a proper fashion. I can imagine what would have happened had the police not been there, and there had been more damage, or they gone in a different direction. Then the call would have been, why wasn't the police present? So it's easy to sit back and say, what if, what it could have been, and those type of things. The fact of the matter is, it occurred. I think the police handled themselves as appropriate as could be expected, given the information they were given and the type of reaction they were receiving.
Okay. All right, we're going to take a quick break now. But after the break, we're going to review the actions taken by the third protest, or at the third protest in January, and the expectations going forward of anyone who wishes to participate in protests in Durham. But we'll be right back after this.
Even an Iraq vet like me who's in really good shape needs good health care. Especially when it's top quality and convenient. And it's not just for men. In fact, aren't you a vet, Patricia?
Yeah, I served in the Air Force.
So why not come in today? When you check in, you'll get a full medical exam, first thing. Free for vets at the VA. So check us out and see you here.
Welcome back to our special edition of City Life. We've been discussing the recent protests here in Durham, which have led to public property damage and arrests. Joining me again to talk about the actions of the police are Mayor Bell and Deputy Chief Larry Smith. Thank you both for staying with me. Appreciate it. Okay, Mayor Bell, at this point, the results of the SBI investigation are in, and the district attorney's office has made a decision that no criminal charges could be filed. Also understand that the SBI is looking into another area based on an anonymous tip by the Huerta family attorney. It seems that the investigation is happening as it should in a professional manner by independent agencies. Do you think the protesters will continue in such a violent manner now that we have more information?
Well, I would hope not. Again, if they want to continue to protest, and if they're willing to follow the guidelines, and by the way, I suspect that probably within the coming week, you're going to see the City Council come out with a public statement relative to protests, because the vast majority really don't know what's involved in the protests. I have to admit, even as the mayor of the city of Durham, I don't know all the details of what's required. So I think that's one of the things that is important, and you're going to see the City Council respond to that. But once they've done that, then I would expect that anyone that wants to protest, they will be expected to abide by the guidelines, and if they don't abide by the guidelines, then they should suffer the consequences. And again, I'm hoping that, I'm glad to see that the family has, at least from media reports, has separated itself from the type of protests that have occurred recently, and I hope that continues. I would really like to know how many of those protesters that were leading this were really from Durham. You know, it's one thing that you're a part of Durham and you're making these protests, but for outsiders to come in and cause the type of havoc that they're doing, it's unacceptable, and the message gets lost. If they want to look at how to protest, you know, they might want to take a sample of what's happening in Marwandi's. There are protests that are happening in Raleigh in mass numbers, but the message doesn't get lost in the protests. Here, the message got lost in the protests, and people don't know what are they protesting about.
Well, that was a good question then. So, Chief Smith, do we know who was involved in the protests, whether they're from Durham or other places?
Yes, we do, and most of those that we know that are organizing the protest, and we strongly believe that those who are advocating the destruction of property are indeed not from Durham. However, many of those who we believe are advocating the violence and the damage, they mask themselves. They're fully masked, so it's hard to identify them.
So the third protest did result in more property damage and some vandalism. Tell our viewers about how the police department decided to respond.
Well, as you mentioned before the break, Beverly, we did receive some pretty heavy criticism from some about our response to the first one, and so we took a bit more of a hands-off approach this time. We still had officers monitoring the march. We had officers on standby, But as they begin to march once again, we experienced all the things that we experienced on the first one, people masking. They did block the streets. There was some graffiti sprayed on some buildings along the way. And as it approached our district substation, we were attempting to mobilize some officers over there because we were really concerned what the outcome was going to be as they went by a police station. But before we could get officers mobilized over there, we had 2 police cars vandalized and the windows of police substation knocked out. And at that point, as we moved in, this time as our mobile field force began to move in to disperse the crowd, they pretty well dispersed themselves. But the damage had been done at that point.
So we didn't know what kind of route they had planned.
We didn't have their route at all. And we had officers with them, so we were a little bit behind the 8 ball on trying to figure out where they were going, since we didn't have a predestined or predetermined route.
Okay. So Mayor Bell, the family, along with their attorney, have said that they aren't encouraging the violence, and I know that the police department has made many attempts to reach out to the family and through their attorney, and that's been to no avail. So what are your thoughts on that, and what would you say to the family and their attorney?
Well, again, I'm probably going to sound like a broken record, but if there's a message that they're trying to get out to the public, or to the council, whoever, the process that has been taken thus far has not worked, in my opinion. I have not had any contact with the family. I want to hasten to add that it's been a practice of mine since I've been mayor that I really don't attend funerals or vigils for specific individuals. It's not that I don't care, it's not that I don't have sympathy, but as mayor, if I do it for one and don't do it for the other, I know I'm going to be suspect. But it doesn't mean by any means that I don't have sympathy for the families that are involved. And again, I think the message that is trying to be sent out has really gotten dwarfed in the type of activities that the protesters have proceeded along. And again, if they want that message to come out, it's a better way to do it than what they're doing now.
Okay. So Chief Smith, what are the police department's expectations of the behavior of people who participate in protest or march?
Basically, that they abide by the law. That they, don't block city streets, that they don't wear masks, that they don't have pyrotechnics, that damage property, to include spraying graffiti on property. Like we mentioned earlier, we're very used to public demonstrations and public protests in Durham, and we just don't have this generally, but we have in these cases.
So very basic expectations.
Basic expectations.
And let me say, members of our council have reached out to the family. I'll speak specifically about Councilor Schewel. Steve Schewel, he's reached out, and the city council knows that he's done that. So we're sensitive to their issues. But again, the point we want to make is it's a better way for them to get their points across. And some of this is a legal background. And all of this involves really the courts. And we want to make sure that we don't prejudice any opinions that the DA might make or the SBI might make by coming out and making statements beforehand.
I see. Okay. So Chief Smith, if another protest occurs in February, how will the department respond to that?
Well, that depends. As we have with all of them, we'll monitor our intelligence sources. We'll see who calls and gives us information. We'll be in close contact with the council through the manager's office and our command staff and our mobile field force, and we'll come together and make a determination based on the intelligence that we're receiving. But just as with all of them, we're going to demand peace, and they've said each time it's going to be peaceful, but that's not what's happened.
Right.
So that's yet to be determined, but we will be prepared.
Mayor Bell, certainly these protests are very disturbing for anyone who calls Durham home and know how we roll pretty much here in Durham. We talk and we get our feelings out, but we don't like to see damage caused or people hurt. What would you say to residents who are dismayed by these protests?
Well, again, great things are happening in our community, and I would ask first that they look at that, and they aren't going to be diminished by actions such as we've seen over the last month or so with these protesters. So again, I'm confident that our police department has the wherewithal to do what needs to be done. I'm confident that the city council will be behind the police department, and I'm confident that the city council will come out with some guidelines to make sure publicly people know the guidelines and rules for addressing protests or having protests. And I think that's about all that we can do. And I would just ask the public to remain confident that we have the city's best interests at heart. By the same token, we understand the right of free speech, the right of people to make their expressions, and we're not going to try to diminish that, but it's going to be done in a very appropriate manner.
All right. Chief Smith, the last question is indeed for both of you, but there's one thing that you'd like to leave our viewers with, any kind of message here. Now's your chance.
Okay. What I would say is, as the police department, we're 100% committed to protecting the constitutional right of people to assemble and to air their grievances. But it also has to be done peacefully. And each one of these marches, they've said this is going to be a peaceful march, but it hasn't been peaceful. There's been a lot of damage and a lot of money's been spent as a result of overtime pay and damage. And we're responsible too to the city and the citizens of Durham who have to pay for that. So I would say it's either time for the marches to indeed be peaceful and lawful or to stop.
Okay. All right, Mayor Bell?
I would agree with the chief.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining me. This has been very informative, and I'm sure a lot of our viewers out there, have had questions about the police department response as well as what we did and didn't know about the protesters. So this is very good. Thank you so much for joining me. Well, that does it for this special edition of City Life. Don't forget to like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter. And you can also find us on YouTube. I'm Beverly Thompson. Thank you for joining me to learn more about City Life in Durham.